Welcome. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and we both welcome you back to another important episode of The New World Next Week, which, of course, you can find everything you need at NewWorldNextWeek.com. James, another week and another mass shooting here in the States. And while the mainstream media will kind of stick to the gun control angle, the Aaron Alexis story is a strange one that it almost seems that today, as soon as the story really started to fall apart, the media completely switched the topic, and today was nothing but Britannica and the Federal Reserve. However, I think it's important to note, not getting into all of the minutia of this Washington shipyard shooting case, two stories came out in the mainstream media today that I think are important to point out. And we'll begin with the story that broke from the BBC. SWAT team stood down at Navy Yard mass shooting scene. One of the first teams of heavily armed police to respond to Monday's shooting in Washington, D.C. was ordered to stand down by superiors, the BBC can reveal. A tactical response team of the Capitol Police, a force that guards the U.S. Capitol complex, was told to leave the scene by a supervisor instead of aiding municipal officers. The Capitol Police Department has launched a review into the matter. Aaron Alexis, 34, killed 12 people at the Washington Navy Yard. I don't think it's a far stretch to say that some lives may have been saved if we were allowed to intervene, a Capitol Police source familiar with the incident told the BBC. Multiple sources in the Capitol Police Department have told the BBC that its highly trained and heavily armed four-man containment and emergency response team, CERT, C-E-R-T, was near the Navy Yard when the initial report of an active shooter came in at about 8:20 a.m. local time. The officers, wearing full tactical gear and armed with HK-416 assault weapons, arrived outside Building 197 a few minutes later, an official with knowledge of the incident told the BBC. According to a Capitol Police source, an officer with the Metropolitan Police Department, Washington, D.C.'s main municipal force, told the Capitol CERT officers they were the only police on the site equipped with long guns and requested their help stopping the gunman. When the Capitol Police team radioed their superiors, they were told by a watch commander to leave the scene, the BBC was told. Several Capitol Police sources who spoke to the BBC asked to remain anonymous for fear of reprisals. Capitol Hill Police Chief Kim Dine has ordered, quote, a comprehensive independent review of the facts surrounding the Capitol Police's response to the Navy Yard shootings. James, adding into this, the other piece that came out in the mainstream today was that Aaron Alexis, in the stock of his gun, the wooden kind of butt, on one side he had carved, better off this way, but on the other side he carved the phrase, my ELF weapon. And it's on the record that he had complained in August to Rhode Island police that he thought he was being electronically harassed or gang stalked, or he was a targeted individual. So, James, this is a bizarre story that, again, I found it really interesting that once the story really started to fall apart today, it kind of was removed from the headlines. Do you have a take from the other side of the world on this?
To be honest, I really have nothing whatsoever to add to this story. It's another month, another Psyop, another silly distraction to try to put gun control on the table, which is a political non-starter. And just like the Colorado shooting last year, or the Sandy Hook shooting even, people will freak out about this story for a few weeks, and then it'll disappear, and it'll be, oh, remember that story about that shooting way back when? Oh, I kind of remember that. It's just another completely meaningless distraction, and I'm not wasting my time or energy even bothering to look into it. It's a psyop. I don't care.
It is quite the psychological operation, and again, when we've been doing this year after year, you can kind of see the signs, and you can kind of see it roll out. So this has been an interesting story, again, in kind of the mainstream take. And, of course, on Ground Zero, my talk show that I work on here in Portland, Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis, we've talked about it a lot. We talk about the paranormal, the parapolitical. We actually had legendary researcher Fritz Springmeier on tonight to kind of talk about these kind of mind control elements to this story. And I even wrote an original piece that's on KXL.com, the station that I work for. And again, all of these links will all be available, and you guys can check all of this out. So, speaking of brainwashing, James, we'll move to our second story with an interesting one from a source we don't often pull from, and that's usmagazine.com. As child star says school brainwashes kids and everybody should drop out. Jaden Smith, 15-year-old son of Will and Jada Smith, think school is very uncool. Last week, the budding singer and actor took to Twitter to rant for some reason about school, education, and the general rules of modern society. Quote, "People used to ask me, what do you want to be when you get older? And I would say, what a stupid question. The real question is, what am I right now? All the rules in this world were made by someone no smarter than you, so make your own. School is the tool to brainwash the youth. Education is rebellion. If newborn babies could speak, they would be the most intelligent beings on the planet." And he ended by saying, if everybody in the world dropped out of school, we would have a much more intelligent society. Everybody get off your phones and go do what you actually want to do. Ironically, Will Smith, his father, and mom, Jada Pinkett Smith, founded their own school, the New Village Leadership Academy in Calabasas, California, back in 2008. And even with the Smiths donating millions of dollars into the private elementary institution, which employed a wide range of untraditional educational methodologies, the academy shut down last June. And interestingly enough, Will Smith has also been a frequent outspoken critic about the parenting philosophies and things. He thinks that specifically, quote, in African-American households, the idea coming out of slavery, there's a concept of your children being property. And that was a major part that Jada and I realized with our kids, he recently told Haute Living magazine. So, James, this is a fascinating story from a child star with a family that has some pretty interesting, I think, connections to the cult of Scientology, who seem to sometimes say things that make a hell of a lot of sense, but when you kind of dig in there. So, James, you submitted this story. What's your take on it?
Well, far be it from me to put much weight into the vapid pronouncements of the latest pop culture icons and, take it for what it's worth. But I do agree with some of the things they're saying, so it is interesting. And it is interesting to see that perspective that they don't want to treat their children like property. And imagine that. Can we even imagine a world in which family relations are not based on ownership in the traditional sense? And what would that mean for a generation that's raised in that manner? Some very interesting things to dig into in that story, and let's not concentrate too much on the source of the pronouncements, because again, that's just the distraction. But at any rate, it's good to see celebrities using their 15 minutes of fame to talk about something more substantial than going to the club or partying like it's 1999 or what have you. Even my references are decades out of date because I just don't care. But I'm glad to see again that the idea that education is just another tool for propaganda and enslavement is at least catching on in certain quarters, and hopefully more people will start to inquire into the roots of this idea.
Yeah, I instantly thought of our friends at tragedyandhope.com and Brett Venad and School Sucks podcast. Hopefully those guys are all over this story. James, I can help you out. That's why you've got the media monarchy with you to help you with these kind of elements. I would actually add in, I'll throw this in, I thought Ashton Kutcher, the actor, he gave a really interesting speech last month to the Kids' Choice Awards, where he essentially, in the same effect, basically said, this is all a bunch of crap. This is all an illusion. Get off your ass and go do something. And it was pretty powerful. So I think we'll include that, James. In this segment, as long as we're talking about schools and brainwashing, I think there's a couple of quick related notes we'll add in here for folks to check out. One would be the biotech industry slipping pro-GMO propaganda into school textbooks, basically talking about the pros and cons of genetically modified foods, which makes claims about GM plants being more pest resistant and reducing pesticide application. Interestingly enough, it doesn't mention any cons. The heading is the pros and cons. And again, you can check out the scan of the school worksheet that 8th graders are now looking at. The other interesting bit of propaganda coming from the aforementioned BBC, they have a new show called Science Britannica, and it's another primetime advertisement for GMO foods and the whole biotech industry, because when you look at the credits, you see that the producers and directors of the show have been involved in other kind of pro-GM propaganda. So, James, having said that and having set the table, if you will, we'll move to our third and final story already this week as we try and do a positive look, and it's on my Twitter account at Media Monarchy, coming to us via the Business Insider. Panera Bread's CEO tries to eat on $4.50 a day. Panera Bread CEO Ron Shaich is spending a week trying to feed himself on $4.50 a day. Shaich took the challenge to find out what it's like to live on food stamps, and he's blogging about the experience on LinkedIn. The average person on food stamps spends $4.50 per day in assistance, this according to the New York Times. When Shaich went shopping with his now new weekly budget of $31, he was surprised that he couldn't afford coffee, fruit, yogurt, or milk. Shaich ended up settling on a daily breakfast of cereal without milk, a lunch of lentils and chickpeas, and a pasta dinner. He bought carrots to snack on in between meals. By the third day of the challenge, Shaich wrote that his diet left him feeling bloated and weak, and by the fourth day, he said his thoughts were consumed by food. And the story goes on to kind of talk about getting in arguments with his wife and just adding extra elements of tension. He spearheads Panera Cares, a collection of cafes that offer free food and operate on pay-what-you-can donations. James, $4.50 a day? Can we do it? Could you do it?
I don't think I could. My family couldn't, that's for sure. And I like one of the top comments on that story was that this guy wouldn't be able to buy anything at one of his own stores if he was on such a budget. So that's just another part of all of this. It is interesting to see this realization among the rich and pampered that, oh my God, food actually does make a difference and that people actually do struggle to make ends meet. So it's interesting to see that at least reflected in some of these headlines and the like coming from these Business Insider type publications that generally focus on macroeconomic issues and what's happening on Wall Street and how many millions or billions Goldman Sachs is making on this or that investment. It's good to bring it back down to the level of reality and people who are actually struggling to make a difference in this world and for whom all of this talk of economic recovery and the like is complete nonsense. So it is good to see a little bit of that being reflected. But of course we have to roll our eyes and wonder what kind of government solutions are going to be proposed, and I suppose we'll all just have to tighten our belt a little bit tighter, both metaphorically and literally, I suppose, if we're trying to balance our budgets and wonder how maybe we can take a little bit more in taxes in order to pay for more food stamps, because that's obviously the way that the economy is going to grow, right? So I think there's ways that this can be manipulated for various agendas, but at any rate, it is good to see at least some stories focusing on the real problems that actual people have every day trying to make ends meet.
I found it really interesting. He said that he's eating lentils and chickpeas and carrots, and in my mind, it's like, that sounds like a pretty damn good start, dude. But the problem is, he's probably only being able to get the pesticide-laden, conventional, non-organic bits. So, James, I'll throw in a couple of other related bits here quickly at the end. It's interesting. We have so it's Panera Bread are the regular restaurants. When they are this sort of pay-what-you-can model, they're called Panera Cares. And we have a Panera Cares here in Portland. So I'll include an interesting article, Problems at Portland's Panera Cares, where Panera Bread CEO Ron Shaich pointed out, this isn't a handout. I think, which in a way speaks in a little bit to the sort of handout culture of Portland, basically talking about everybody they don't want to pay anything. They just want it all totally for free. Our ex-governor, Ted Kulongoski, back in 2007, did this exact same thing. He lived on $3 a day in grocery money for a week and urged the rest of Oregon to take the food stamp challenge. And one last bit posted today by our good friend Brock West, just what the doctor ordered. Med students team with chefs. And I think, James, this speaks to what you were talking about. As they say it in this article specifically, medical students teaming up with chefs because food should be your medicine and your medicine should be your food. So I would implore folks to check out all these stories. And again, a huge thanks to everybody who helps me post things in the Media Monarchy Kingdom. And for folks submitting story ideas on Twitter using hashtag #NewWorldNextWeek, just like at Jim Cognition submitted the story about the biotech industry slipping the pro-GMO propaganda into textbooks. So, James, having said all of that, man, I will throw it back to you and thank you for another great week.
Excellent. And just before we go, I guess I should mention that the real solution, once again, to these food and economic problems is what you can do at home. So growing your own food and or trading with others around you in your local community is the way out of this, not more dependence on the industrial food production, which is enabled through the food stamp system and the like. Anyway, having said that, thank you once again for putting these stories together. I'm looking forward to next week.
Actually, I'll stop you right there and note we're going to take next week off. I'm going to be out of town.
I'll see you in 2 weeks. All right. Well, you have a good week off, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks so much. Take care.